Harber is professor of psychology at Rutgers University, here now to talk about how communities cope with disasters. Kate, good to have you back here again.
Hi, Laura.
And the studies that you've done, you've analyzed how communities deal or don't deal with tragedies. What's your research found?
Okay, so this started after the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. I was a graduate student at that time at Stanford.
That's also known as the San Francisco earthquake, where the stadium?
Exactly.
That happened at the stadium? Okay, all right, yes.
Right, we call it the pretty big one because it was almost as bad as the 1906 one, which destroyed the city. So it was a major event, loss of life, many people displaced, so it was a big deal for people living there. And the way I coped was I ran around gathering data. And with a colleague of mine, Brian Newson, we went to first San Francisco and then took the ferry there to Oakland, and people were grabbing the survey we had out of our hands like they were hotcakes. And we get to Oakland, and we have people, again, grabbing one person say, can we make copies for our coworkers? And then another man said, can I make a copy and give it to my wife? And I said, sure, but why? He says, it'll do her some good. And this man's insight really captured a lot of what was going on in the Bay Area.
Okay, so what was going on? Were people not talking about it, not knowing how to deal with it? What?
It was exactly this, that a disaster creates what we call a social dilemma. When people have had a major event, they need to talk. We talk because that's where our mind heals. We get clarity, we're able to get social support. And so people, when they disclose, their health is better. So my colleague on the rest of this research, Jamie Pennebaker, has shown that when people talk about their thoughts and feelings, they literally get sick less often. Their immune system is more robust. They have a higher T-cell count. So talking makes you feel better, but hearing does not. Being in the presence of a depressed person for 15 minutes can cause you to feel depressed and angry. So now we have a community where everybody is cast their role simultaneously as victims seeking to disclose and as possible listeners hearing other people's disclosures. What happens when people in a whole community are simultaneously cast in both victim and support at the same time? And that's what this research looked at.
So let's talk about some of the phases of coping. One in particular I'm interested in is called the inhibition phase. Can you explain that?
Sure. So the initial phase, which is called the emergency, people are thinking and talking at a high rate.
So something bad has happened. Everybody's talking.
Everybody's talking.
And it's okay to talk.
It's okay to talk. People want to hear. Social barriers go down. You go in a supermarket, total strangers are talking to each other. But around week 3 in the Bay Area, people are still thinking a lot, but they're not talking very much. And in fact, a T-shirt came out around then that said, "Thank you for not sharing your quake experience with me." All right? So there might have been this subtle message, which is, I've heard enough, keep it to yourself. People are thinking, they're not talking. And this lasts for about 4 weeks, and during this period is when symptoms start arising.
What kind of symptoms are you talking about?
Many more bad dreams about the earthquake specifically. Arguments with coworkers, with family. There was particularly troubling was that there was a spike in aggravated assaults only in the Bay Area during this inhibition phase. And more complaints about illnesses.
Now listen, some people are just more inclined to talk. I'm an extrovert. My husband's an introvert.
Right.
He keeps everything in.
Right.
How do you rectify, conciliate these feelings?
That's a very important question because that really creates some of the dilemma. And so people negotiate that in different ways. And sometimes there are these subtle messages. There's a term called pseudo-sympathetic responses, such as, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, or you're going to be fine. And
So stop whining.
Stop whining. That's what the subtext is. And so that's kind of subtle message causes people to shove it down, possibly. And that's when these symptoms seem to arise.
All right, now tell me how you applied this research to the first Persian Gulf War.
Okay. So Pennebaker and I were just the process of writing up the earthquake studies. I'm in Dallas, and the first Persian Gulf War just happened to start right then. And we did basically the exact same survey study we did with the earthquake, and we found strikingly similar patterns. First 2 weeks, people are talking and thinking a lot. Weeks 2 to 6, people are thinking but not talking, and we have nearly the same pattern of symptoms. Dreams about the war, if you chart them and look at the chart of them compared to the rates of dreams about the earthquake from the earthquake study, are almost a perfect overlay. And there was a spike in crime of aggravated assaults only during that period.
Can there be a fine line where you overtalk and you are thus making the situation worse because you won't stop talking about it and you're making people crazy, and can we just move on? Not to take away from the seriousness of what's going on.
I think that's, for some people that's possible, but it seems as that we are sort of developed, wired, so that once we really have the disclosure that we need, and a colleague of mine, Anita Kelly, has shown that when people have a listener who seems to really get it, we don't need to do it repeatedly. Once we really feel that a person has understood what we're saying, we're done.
All right, I've got about 10 seconds left, so give me your final thoughts, research coping skills, because this can be applied to any number of situations that people are going through.
Right.
Not just, you know, San Francisco back then, but any number of situations.
Absolutely. Well, one of the maybe take-home messages is that for those who deal with community disasters, is that the emergency hotlines tend to go up for the first 2 weeks, and then they sort of take them down just at the point where this intubation phase is occurring. So maybe we need to acknowledge and make people aware, and make the sort of emergency hotline people aware, that it's really during the weeks 3, 4, 5, 6, when people seem to be okay, that they might really need to have added resources.
All right, well, we thank you so much for your insight and analysis, kind of similar to the stages of grieving that people go through. So bottom line, reach out for help. Ken Harber, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.